Bills with a 37-3 rout of the Commanders. It could have, or should I say, should have been maybe even worse. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast, everyone.
And I'm Jon Scott from FedEx Field, where the Bills defense, whoo, boy, Kevin, they were humming. They were getting after it. Defensive front, linebackers, secondary. Everyone was eating on that side of the ball. Offense, we could talk a little bit about it, Kevin, because I agree with you. Even though you put up 37 points, I think there's a little more things to dive into of what could get better on that side of the ball. And, of course, all of our conversation is trending towards what is going to be an awesome game a week from now.
I was going to say, we'll have plenty of time to get into this, but had the Bills took advantage more of what the defense did, Miami puts up 70, Bills could have put up like 50-something, setting up a big game coming up next week. But we'll get to next week, John, and we'll start with not Josh Allen this time. We'll start on the defense and the quarterback, as they say, of the defense at middle linebacker, Terrell Bernard, John. Now, 2 weeks in a row, we're 3 games in, but 2 weeks in a row with an interception, a massive afternoon for the middle linebacker who took over and was a big question mark for middle linebacker when Tremaine Edmunds left. What was going to happen? He did not play during the preseason due to injury and then was the week 1 starter. And now here we are, John, and he is taking center stage as, early in the season, but looks like a big stud for that middle linebacker position.
Kevin, you know me. I'm not a hot take type of guy. I don't like to really go too off the handle, for lack of a better term, when saying certain things. But it was tough for me to sit there in the press box this week and even last week, see some of the plays Terrell Bernard is making, and think that I'm not sure those same plays would be made if Tremaine Edmunds was still the Buffalo Bills middle linebacker. Tremaine is a phenomenal player. I'm not taking anything away from him. There's just a different skill set and style that Terrell Bernard brings to the position, brings to this defense, and I think you were seeing what that dynamic ability, especially against the pass, can bring. He's a little more of a fly around because he's an undersized guy. We knew when he was drafted that playing in coverage was a strength of his coming out of Baylor. And he made an insanely, incredibly athletic, leaping up the ladder interception in this game, falls on a fumble, was flying through, blowing up the middle with some sacks. I mean, he was absolutely all over the field. And as you mentioned, this is the second week in a row he has a turnover. I'm putting my money on Terrell Bernard being the AFC Defensive Player of the Week. And 3 weeks in here, Kevin, you could call it an experiment. You could call it a changing of the guard, however you want to phrase it. It seems like the Bills are getting exactly what they had hoped for, and maybe that is a little bit of a different style from the middle of their defense in Terrell Bernard.
Yeah, I know going into camp, maybe some questions, John, going in with Tremaine Edmunds. Should they have moved on from Tremaine Edmunds? What do we have at middle linebacker right now? So many questions. It was the big thing we followed during training camp. And again, it is 2 weeks, John, but it sure looks to me like this young man is stacking something together really nice for himself and as one of the leaders of this defense that already has a number of leaders on it.
And I'm not an X's and O's guy. I'm not a film guy. So I can't speak to this too greatly. There are far other better, smart, knowledgeable people where that is their avenue that I'm sure could speak better to this. But I just think from my eye test, I think what Terrell Bernard's skill set is, again, that's different, not better or worse than what Tremaine Edmunds brought to the defense. I think it allows Sean McDermott, now the new defensive play caller, to operate differently, to implore the middle linebacker differently than maybe the Bills were with Tremaine Edmunds in the middle. And I think whether it's dropping back and how he can play in coverage or sending him on the blitz, which is something I liked when they did that with Tremaine. They just didn't do it that often. I think we're seeing Bernard come on the blitz a little bit more. He's getting home, and it's largely in part as well to the way the defensive line is eating. But I just think that it's a transition. Again, it's not saying better, worse. It's new, it's different, and so far through 3 games at least, 2 games maybe if you just include the last 2 and take out the Jets albeit the defense played very well in that one as well. I think the return on investment, moving on from Tremaine Edmonds and sticking to their guns of evaluating a talent, drafting and developing Terrell Bernard, is paying off.
2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. Sure, delivering in this, and it helps, John, that he has a lot of talent around him. And you mentioned the rest of the pass rush there in that front four. And again, with McDermott, he does dial up a blitz here and there, John. But during our postgame show, while you were in the Bills locker room, Fred Jackson and I talking about Leonard Floyd. Holy cow, what a find this guy is. And what's going to happen once Von Miller is back in the lineup? You just have this front four pass rush where all of them, and it was funny listening to the guys after the game, competing with each other. One guy gets a sack. Well, I want to go get a sack. And on and on and on it went with this defense against a first-year quarterback that we said before the game even happened, there were opportunities there for the Bills to take advantage of the situation.
Sam Howell had been sacked 10 times in 2 games. He was sacked 9 times by the Bills themselves in this one. So you're right. We put people on notice. This was a possibility. We certainly didn't say, they're going to get the 3rd most sacks in franchise history in a single game, and they're just going to be pressuring Sam Howell ad nauseum 75, 80% of the time he drops back. But you're right, Leonard Floyd, and it's flashed from the very jump. Unfortunately, the result of the play with the Aaron Rodgers injury overshadowed things. But Leonard Floyd in that Jets game was sensational, battled through an injury this week, still came in, two more sacks. And you're right. If this is what you're getting off the edge with Leonard Floyd, just imagine when you add another body. And I like what Shaq Lawson does, but if he's the odd man out, now you're inserting Von Miller. Now you got Epinesa, Rousseau, Floyd, and Von Miller as your 4 edge rushers. You might be hard-pressed to find a deeper, more talented group of pass rushers on any defensive line here. They're all starting to eat, Leonard Floyd said after the game. When I asked him about the rotation, this is the new thing for him throughout his career. He's been a high-volume snap count guy. We know the Bills, no more than 60% really for anyone on the defensive line. And he said, it makes me feel fresher. My legs feel stronger. And you're noticing the opportunities that he gets, maybe not as many as in the past at other stops, whether it was the Rams or the Bears. But now, 30 years old, he's coming off the edge full bore every single time because he's fresh. You're seeing that with everybody else. Whatever the Bills' defensive line is doing now, and if it's simply the addition of Leonard Floyd and the maturation of other guys, I don't know. But whatever they're doing, it is working because it's not just the 9-sack performance here this afternoon against the Commanders. I said it on this show many times after the Jets and the Raiders game. I think they've been the most consistent and the best part of what the Bills have done through 3 weeks of this season.
You mentioned A.J. Epinesa, so there is annually a Bills media and player golf outing. I was on a team with A.J. Epinesa back in June, John, and when you spend time on a golf course with someone, talking to them and getting to know them, you kind of, by nature, kind of become a fan. And going into training camp, John, we were looking at A.J. as one of those guys who were on the bubble. He might not even make the roster. What's going to happen? I can't remember if you said maybe they trade him and move on from him at one point, but he's delivering now this year. You can go back to the Raiders game. I think he had a sack or a big tackle for a loss. And then today in this game, the interception, the ups that A.J. Epinesa got and just came down with the ball, returned it for a pick 6. And then you hear from players in the post game that he does that to Josh Allen on a regular basis in practice.
Yeah, I don't know if he's catching every single one of them, but I think those big mitts are certainly in the passing lanes for even the greatest or one of the greatest quarterbacks in all of the National Football League. He added a sack, you're right. Last week, it was his length, I think, that you're referring to, where he batted a pass up in the air off the edge again. This is what the Bills are doing when they're drafting these large human beings coming off the edge in A.J. Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, another one. Even the guys in the interior, these other guys, Leonard Floyd is a long, tall, 6'4" type guy as well. They're not only good at getting to the quarterback and taking them down, they're also good at putting their hands up and disrupting the throwing lanes as well. Great mitts there, and I joked with him after the game. He, on Friday, brought over to me and a couple reporters in the locker room this butter cake that his mom had baked because she was in town for the Raiders game, and
as moms tend to do, they do a lot of cooking. They leave you a bunch of stuff when you leave. Even NFL players, it's the same thing for them. And he brought it over. He's like, my mom makes the best butter cake. And he's no lie. No lies were detected there. It was absolutely sensational. I'm like, AJ, I think Mama is going to have to send you some more butter cake, man, because that was the fuel to the fire this afternoon. He just smiled and said, yeah, I think you're right. So an impressive performance. And what I had said was I lumped him into that group with a bold prediction that one of the higher draft picks potentially, whenever they were deemed maybe an odd man out in a competition, could be on the fence. He was kind of one that was more on the peripheral of that conversation. We know Boogie Basham ultimately was the one who got traded to the Giants. He showed flashes last season, and I think it's a continued burn here. Let's not forget with A.J. Epinesa, he came in at 280 and was a pure power bull rusher coming out of Iowa. The Bills asked him to drop into like the 250s, become more of a speed guy. From a physical standpoint, that's a heck of a transformation on top of learning the NFL game and all that comes with that. So the first year and a half, it's almost a wash for him. He not only had to learn his body, change his body, learn how to keep the weight, keep it off, how to be strong without just dropping weight. That's not an easy thing to do, even when you have the best resources around. Then he had to learn a completely different way to rush the passer because he just used size and strength for 4 years at Iowa. Now he has to learn different techniques. He's worked with Leonard Floyd. I've even seen him at training camp working there. Floyd mentioning that as well. Shaq Lawson referenced after the game how maybe a similar career path, while Lawson was a first-round pick and Epinesa a second, it was a bit of a slow burn. And we saw what Shaq did going into his contract year with the Bills and ultimately got paid going elsewhere. You maybe just sometimes, and it's tough in this day and age, especially on a Super Bowl contender, you got to preach some patience and have it. And I think the Bills are slowly starting to reap the rewards of the patience that they have had with A.J. Epinesa.
Yeah, definitely championship caliber defense that we're looking at through the first 3 games, John. And good to see 2 players that dealt with injury last year getting into the mix and coming up with interceptions of their own today. Micah Hyde, his first interception of the season. He missed the bulk of last season. And John, Tre'Davious White with an interception in the end zone. And Sean McDermott saying we're starting to see the Trey White we saw pre-injury. And that sure looked like it on that interception in the end zone to stop a Commanders drive in the second half.
This has been a bit of a talking point over the past couple of weeks, even in the training camp, the eye test. What does Trey look like? And for me, you see flashes. Trey seems to be in position, but maybe he wouldn't always seem to make the play. The interception he made here this afternoon against the Commanders was the play that you would see all-pro, pre-knee injury Tre'Davious White make. And I think it's the most obvious example that he's trending back towards that direction. I still don't think he's there yet. I think he would admit that. I think the coaching staff would, and that's absolutely okay. If he just continues week by week, you see a little more flashes, 2%, 3% better. It's all about, for this team and him, trending towards the playoffs. And if he can continue to stack this and get better and his body feels better and the instincts are better and everything is just flowing closer and closer to what he was prior to the injury, it's going to be a scary thought when you think about it, that this defense that now has this newfound relentless pass rush with just their defensive front, if you can also add into the mix the return of an all-pro caliber top cornerback, I mean, the Bills defense just seems to be adding guys and talent, whether it's development or additions or whatever, return to form from injuries. This is a group that you're starting to see, okay, they didn't make any bold moves in terms of signings really outside of Floyd, simply getting these guys back to the caliber they were at or improvements from the youth. You're starting to see what that could mean for the level that this defense, it's already been great for years, could even be even better now.
A late field goal, John, by the Commanders spoiled the shutout for this Bills defensive unit.
Weak.
I know. That's got to drive you nuts. But you look at the Bills unit throughout the game, and there were 2 opportunities where the Commanders driving down the field. One of them, I believe they were right around the 5, 1st and goal at the 5. Bills hold through 4 downs, get the ball back, and then that Tre'Davious White play. So the Bills bent a little bit here and there, and the Commanders were able to get some yards on the ground for the most part. But it's good to see that when the Bills defense had their back up against the wall, two major stops in this game while the score was still close. I think both of them came while the score was still at least a 2-touchdown area of point differential.
Bend don't break. What has that kind of been the motto of the Leslie Frazier, Sean McDermott defense since 2017? You'd see, not often because they've been a great defense, but you'd see them give up yards, and you're just like, what is happening here? And then they would hold them to field goals, or they would get a turnover, and things would ultimately be fine. It was more about
the scoreboard rather than necessarily the box score.
You saw some of that. I agree with you in terms of Brian Robinson ran the ball really well, but he only got 10 carries, but it was for 70 yards. He seemed to be churning things out. It was good to see this Bills defense respond, be timely, be opportunistic, and make some plays there. You can't possibly expect that to happen all the time, but you also can't expect them to stop every team on every single drive that they play as well. Overall, an incredibly solid performance, dominating, really, if you want to be more precise. And that's on the heels of what we pretty much coined a dominating performance a week ago against the Raiders outside of that opening drive. Stacking days is what this team likes to say very often. Stacking weeks here. What a performance by the Bills defense, and it's a good early indication of what they could be with their talent and their new play caller in Sean McDermott.
It feels odd to be halfway or past the halfway mark of the podcast to be bringing up Josh Allen, but that's just the way the game played out. The quarterback, a rather pedestrian afternoon, threw for a touchdown, ran one in, John. I think the offense as a whole, penalties killed them. Play calling, to me, killed them at times. There's still some questionable play decisions made on crucial downs that I'm just not digging at this point. But overall, Allen for the second week in a row, not the Josh Allen we saw against the Jets, but also not quite the Josh Allen we saw against the Raiders.
You hit a lot of things I hope we get to here. Play calling certainly being one of them, but I'll start here with Josh Allen. 62.5% completion, threw it 32 times, 218 yards, touchdown, and an interception. I'll just say the interception, it's like an arm punt is like a phrase we like to use here. 3rd and long, just chuck it deep down the field. Try to give your receiver a play on the ball. If it's intercepted, who cares? Because you're punting anyways. It's just a little negative blip on your own individual stat sheet. So I didn't look at that as a poor decision, like reverting back to the absurdness that we saw in the Jets opener here. I just was curious, and we discussed this going into the game. Is Josh going to be able to maintain and carry that patient approach over here to the Commanders game? I don't really think he did. And it wasn't like he was thrown in a double coverage. He just was not making it a point of emphasis, or the team wasn't, to really just take these 3-5 check down type throws. It was a lot more of the driving the ball 10 plus yards down the field. He wasn't throwing it like 30, 40 yards, deep bombs in a double coverage. I just felt that from a flow perspective for the Bills offense, they could have put themselves in far more manageable down and distance situations had they maybe just been a little more patient and take what the defense gives you, whether that's schematically, whether that's play calling, whether that's Josh's decision making. I think the stat line from an efficiency standpoint probably could have been better. The offense as a whole probably could have been more efficient and gotten themselves in better position. And maybe this score would have been in the 50s, like you said. It should have been if they would have been better in those areas here. And that starts with Josh Allen. I will reiterate, I'm not saying you need to put the handcuffs on Josh Allen and put him in a straitjacket and not have him be what he is best at. And that's what Sean McDermott said even after the game. But there is, I think, this little part of it where they want him to be more of what they saw last week with those dashes of spectacular, which, again, we saw here this afternoon, but also being that efficient guy that can methodically lead an offense and put a unique, different type of pressure on opposing defenses.
All right, let's get into play calling right now, John, because this is a bugaboo of mine. Going into this game, especially after watching some of the college football on Saturday and then watching how the Bills started today. I think I told you during the last podcast or last week, I am getting sick and tired of these quick hitters and swing passes to players to try and beat one guy or two guys out on the edge. And the Bills started with that. The first play of the game on offense was a swing pass out to Kincaid that went nowhere. I have in the second quarter like a 3rd and 12. It was like a screen to Stephon Diggs that got blown up where they were on the verge of scoring. That makes you want to, well, you can't, but it makes me want to pull the hair out of my head. Sorry, I had to go there. But again, throughout the day, the reverse to Gabe Davis, just a number of plays at certain moments in this game that left you scratching your head as that's not a high percentage play to run right there. And I thought that cost them putting up more points throughout the game. That and a lot of penalties too. Or not a lot, but yeah.
It's funny that those are the plays that you pick out. The ones that drive me nuts and pull out my non-existent hair. What in the world are they doing with these 2nd and long, 2nd and 10 run plays? I just didn't understand it. If you're going to, I'm not saying you never run on 2nd and long, but it just seemed to happen over and over and over again. And you're gaining 2, 3, 1. It's just, what are they doing? And then that puts you so far behind the sticks at 3rd and long that everything changes in terms of the play calling that you can do, the way defenses are going to play you. Just there's little margin for error, and you're just fighting upstream the entire time. And to me, that's where part of the issues come. These decisions in 2nd and long, some of these decisions to run the football were peculiar to me. I agree. I don't have a problem I agree with some of the issues. The Stephon Diggs screen pass on 3rd and long, I don't really understand that. I didn't have a problem with what they did to open the game. I actually liked the end around, but I would like it to not go to necessarily Gabe Davis. I would prefer that to go to probably 2 to 3 other guys on the roster, like a Deontay Hardy or something. So to me, that's where my issues are in terms of the play calling. Not every play is going to win. Not every play is going to be right. There are going to be times where you don't necessarily maybe like the decision and it works, or you like the decision and it didn't work, or whatever the outcome may be. But for me, you don't like the short, quick bubble screens and things like that to try to get guys in space. I'm more okay with that. To me, it's why repeatedly are we seeing 2nd and 10 handed off to James Cook up the middle?
Yeah, James Cook, almost 100 yards on the ground. Last week, over 100 yards, John. And you were talking about the eye test. For the eye test, I looked at this game, and the ground game didn't exactly do to my eyes what I thought it would do. But again, James Cook, what did he have? 50 carries, 98 yards. So still, maybe they're leaning on it too much, but it looked more effective in the second half than it did in the first half.
This is what I liked to see out of the Bills' running game. It wasn't overly successful really at all in the first half and even early into the second. But this is something that the Bills, it's good for them to do for so many reasons. Lean on the running game to close out games. That's something that's important. If you can't close out games, you can't bleed them out, you can't almost run them into submission, for lack of a better term, that's what you need to do so you're not relying on Josh Allen or you're stalling on drives. And these guys have to play late into the game. You're able to get some of the backups into the game. And not only was it James Cook who got stronger, had the big 34-yard run, 15 for 98, but late in the game is when you'd see a little more Damian Harris. You finally saw Latavius Murray get into the action. They both had 5 carries for 15 yards, and they both had a long of 7. So it's not like they were overly efficient or effective, but that's where you bring those guys in to kind of be the hammer at the end of things here. Encouraging to see the Bills running game, because for the first half of this game, Josh Allen was the leading rusher again, a tale as old as time that we've talked about here. But it's, James Cook said afterwards, he's feeling good. He's feeling confident. And as we said late in the week, he had the birth of his daughter. And I was able to talk to him the day before his daughter was born. And I asked him about it first time we got into chat since his daughter was born, and he said it was motivating for him, and he's really looking forward to get home to his daughter once again. So you're seeing an inspired, and maybe, not going to take all the credit, Kevin, but maybe a little bit more open up James Cook.
Did you get it?
Maybe,
did you get him out of his shell a little bit? Did you kind of?
Kevin, you know what? Maybe we're getting in the groove again. I sit down with someone, they have a good game. This is maybe the way.
Well, you're going to need to sit down with someone special this week with the Dolphins coming to town. Jon, going in, we had the offensive line circled as a concern with what the Commanders were going to be bringing against that offensive line, and Josh Allen not sacked at all. I mean, he had to do some running. He wasn't just sitting there in a clean pocket all the time, but no sacks for Josh Allen, and the offensive line for now 2 weeks in a row now seemed to step up and meet the task at hand.
Only one quarterback hit as well from the Washington defense, and that was from Montez Sweat. You're right. It was a collective effort, and I mean that collective as all five guys up front, maybe sometimes even more if you're throwing in Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, David Edwards is a sixth blocker. However it was doing that, those guys collectively, they held up because as we mentioned going into it, this was different than minimizing Max Crosby because you could send some help and chip him, and it doesn't have to necessarily always be Spencer Brown or someone mano-a-mano. When you got 4 first-round picks of the caliber of what Washington has, you really can't afford to slide anything another direction because all 4 of them can beat you and wreak some havoc here. And collectively, the Bills' offensive line was absolutely sensational here. And you're right, there were some times, which is to be expected. It's not even a knock or a negative on the offensive line. These guys are so talented. It's bound to happen. There's one I remember, Chase Young on the stunt, came in off the edge and blew right up the middle. And I'd say 95% of the quarterbacks in the league, lights out, man. It's over. The play's down. You're sacked. Josh Allen's just special, and that's one of those special moments. He eludes it, rips up field, and gets a first down with his legs. He did his part as well as eluding the pressure, using his legs, buying time, getting rid of the ball, taking off, and running to help aid so those guys don't have to be a stonewall 100% of the time. But everyone, they worked together very, very well. And as we continue to look at this game singularly as its own, but with also eyes ahead to next week, Miami's pass rush is wicked as well, and another tall task awaits.
Is this a concern, Jon? After week 1 against the Jets, talked about needing a secondary pass catchers to kind of step up, get the ball around more. Gabe Davis had a touchdown today, but that was his only catch. Stephon Diggs, not 8 receptions for over 100 yards. Everyone else, 2 catches, 1 catch, 2 catch, 1 catch. Is it just how this game played out, or does that also have something to do with the fact that that's one of the reasons why this offense didn't put up as many points as we thought the offense should have, because of the fact that most of the time Allen was looking for Diggs and getting the ball to Diggs and not as spread out as we saw against the Raiders?
This can't simply be, well, this is why this was this way. There's multiple layers to this. I'd put some of it on Josh is the trigger man. And if some of these guys are open underneath and he's deciding to drive it down the field a little more, we understand it's common sense. The further down the field you're throwing the football, the lower the percentage that it's going to be a completion here. So I think when you see far more of a diversified target share a week ago, and Josh is at 84% completion, and you saw it, again, the short passes underneath, taking what the defense gives, well, that's where I think the distribution is going to be far more wide. This one, not the same. Diggs at 12 targets. The team as a whole at 31. So that's, 19 other targets amongst 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. And you're right. It was 4 targets for Davis, 3 for Sherfield, who finally gets in the stat book for the first time as a Bill with 2 catches for 18 yards. Hardy had 3 targets, Cook 3 targets, Knox 2, Latavius Murray, Shakir had 1, Dalton Kincaid. I got to say, Kevin, I don't think it's problematic in terms of I'm worried about Dalton Kincaid or his place in the offense, but I'm very surprised. 2 targets for 2 catches for 3 yards, one of which a 4-yard gain. So he went backwards on one play. Surprising that he, for the first time, really wasn't involved much at all. You want to see them, again, just have better secondary options, but maybe this is going to be the recipe. Maybe it's not Diggs gets 12 and someone else gets 8. Maybe it's Diggs gets 12 and then you're throwing to 8 guys, and that collectively gets you the diversification here that you need.
You just stole my thunder. That's where I was going to go with it. Like, looking at the stat line, maybe it's just not the fact that it's Diggs and 2 other guys that are getting the ball. It's Diggs is getting his, and the ball's getting spread out to many more people than just another couple of targets.
Which is fine. And until the offense stinks or isn't moving the ball or the passing game is a mess, I think you just kind of take it for what it is. And let's also be clear, Diggs should be getting 12 targets because he gets 8 receptions for 111 yards. Most of the plays that Stephon Diggs and catches he was making, he was open, really open, which when you watch amazing wide receivers, even if it's on the opposing team, you always wonder, Tyreek Hill's like this. How in the hell does that guy get so wide open when you know how good he is? Well, that's why they're so good. Stephon Diggs, regardless of how many talented people you put around him and try to defend him and how good you know he is or great you know he is, he's still so great that he can beat you anyways. If Diggs is open, Allen's going to get him the ball, and he was open a lot here this afternoon.
Yeah, so the Bills now 2-1 on the season. They take care of business on the road at Washington, now coming back home for a huge game with the Miami Dolphins. John, we're going to get into this game a lot coming up in the middle of the week. Do you want to kind of go instant reaction right now? I wasn't even aware of what the Dolphins did until you told me on the post-game show, because I was doing other things, wasn't even looking at other scores around the NFL. But that Dolphins offense through 3 games is a machine right now and will be tough to handle. And right now, I think the way the Bills handled the Raiders with short passes, move the ball down the field, may end up being what the play is here on offense, and try not to get into a shootout with the Dolphins.
The Dolphins scored 70 points on the Broncos. 70 points, 726 yards of total offense, 726. They ran the ball for 350 yards. 350 yards. They have a young running back who went 18 for 203. Raheem Mostert, just a casual 13 for 82 and 3 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill, 11 targets, 9 catches, 157 and a touchdown as he continues out the gate. To make it clear, he's really going for 2,000 receiving yards. And then you talk about secondary options. They didn't have Jalen Waddle. We will have to see how he progresses throughout the week. Without him, these running backs are getting the targets. Mostert had 7. The other running back has 4. And it didn't matter. 726 yards of total offense and 70 points. Those are the numbers that you see in Alabama, in Ohio State put up when they're facing, to my fellow former people in my old place, Youngstown State FCS schools and Arkansas A&M or whatever
Sacred
it may be.
Heart.
Exactly. Right. If they played Ohio State, it would be 70 to not 20. But you're right. I mean, this is amazing, and they're doing it on so many levels, running the football and throwing it. Mike McDaniel is an amazing offensive mind. They got things humming. Outside of maybe second half against the Patriots, I mean, they've been seemingly unstoppable. So it's going to be a tall task. I'm just super excited that the Bills, especially defensively, have really shown over the first 3 weeks, and in particular these last 2, what sort of machine that they are. And I think it's really setting up for a matchup that's going to be really fun. And I don't know if it's going to be a shootout or if both defenses maybe will keep the other ones in check, the offenses, and maybe we're looking at more of like a low 20s game. I have no idea. And like you said, we'll devote a full pod to it. But just thinking about it, because this game was so lopsided, I'm stoked.
Yeah, I just think the blueprint might have been what the Patriots did in the second half a couple of weeks ago. Patriots have a good defense too, you put their offense aside. So that might provide a little bit of a blueprint on what to do to kind of slow down this Miami offense. But I don't know. Usually this week, it's early in the season, confidence high at home going against the Dolphins. But there's got to be a bit of concern and a bit of pause right now going into this one that, yeah, Josh Allen owns the Dolphins. He always beats the Dolphins. This is just setting up right now, John, to just be something completely different than anyone who's a Bills fan has been used to when the Bills take on Miami at this point.
I think it's exciting, and not to take anything away from certainly Kansas City, but this maybe could be a matchup between two of the best teams in all of football, not even the AFC. And to get it in, God willing, normal weather conditions here as we get to the end of September, and not some unearthly, unworldly type of heat or cold, to get these two teams playing and taking the elements out of it. It's all neutral of sorts, playing inside Highmark Stadium. I think it's just going to be really cool. Now they have a full year of knowing what each other's like in the new system down in Miami with the new weapons that they have. It's going to be just a super fun game. And even though I'm not from Western New York or Buffalo, and I know you're not, it's good to see this rivalry reignite with these two teams being at the top of the pile rather than, oh, well, we're just the two rivals because no one can beat the Patriots.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be refreshing to see. Should be a fun week, John. And, of course, we'll be back with our Dolphins at Bills podcast coming out on Wednesday after the Bills hold their media day to get you ready. So that's the next time we will be there, or here, rather. For Jon Scott, I'm Kevin Carroll. As always, thanks for joining us, everyone.